A man has just been stoned to death. The entire crowd hurled rocks at him until he collapsed. He was the king's envoy, the tax collector. They sent him to negotiate with a furious people, and the people stoned him to death in front of everyone. First Book of Kings, chapter 12, verse 18. And while Adoram's body is still on the ground, King Rehoboam, son of Solomon, the heir to the most powerful throne Israel ever had, jumps into his chariot at full speed and flees. The king flees from his own people. That happened just days after Solomon's death, and it was only the beginning, because what followed was a chain of catastrophes so brutal that in less than 5 years, everything Solomon built, his temple, his wealth, his empire, was plundered, divided, or destroyed. 10 of the 12 tribes separated forever. A new king forged 2 golden idols and created a false religion for the entire north. An Egyptian pharaoh invaded Jerusalem and took every last gold shield from the temple. And the people of God ended up practicing the exact same abominations for which God had expelled the Canaanites from that land. 5 things, all terrifying, all connected. And it all started with a single phrase spoken by an arrogant young man who had no idea what he was doing. But to understand how we got there, you need to step back a little. Because the bomb didn't explode the day Solomon died. The bomb was assembled during the last years of his life, and God warned him, word for word. Solomon ruled the largest empire Israel had ever known. First Book of Kings, chapter 4, verses 21 through 24. From the Euphrates River to the border of Egypt, every kingdom paid him tribute. Judah and Israel lived in safety, each one under his vine and under his fig tree. The golden age, the absolute peak, and Solomon destroyed it himself. First Book of Kings, chapter 11, verses 1 through 4. Solomon loved many foreign women, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, Hittites, from the nations about which God had said, "You shall not go into them, for they will surely turn your heart after their gods." 700 wives, 300 concubines, 1,000 women. And verse 4 says something that freezes your blood. When Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God. The man who built the temple of God ended up building temples for false gods, altars for Ashtoreth, goddess of the Sidonians, for Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites, a high place for Chemosh, god of Moab, on the very mountain that faces Jerusalem. First Book of Kings, chapter 11, verses 5 through 8. And then God speaks, verse 11, "Since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant." I will tear the kingdom from you. That sentence is a verdict. It's not a warning. It's not a conditional threat. It's a decree. And what comes after Solomon's death is the execution of that verdict, step by step, in the most brutal and terrifying way you can imagine. But there's something hidden in this chapter that most people overlook. God tells Solomon he's not going to tear away the entire kingdom. Verse 13, "I will not tear away all the kingdom. I will give one tribe to your son, for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem that I have chosen." God decides to preserve one tribe for the house of David, just one. Well, actually 2, because Benjamin stayed with Judah. But the point is that out of 12 tribes, 10 were going to be ripped away. 10 out of 12, that's 83% of the nation. And the most terrifying part is that this destruction didn't come from outside. It came from within. Each of the 5 things that are about to happen was provoked by human decisions, by arrogance, by idolatry, by political stupidity. And each one was worse than the last. Solomon dies. His son Rehoboam prepares to take the throne. And this is where everything starts to collapse. And what I'm about to tell you now reads like a Greek tragedy. But it's not fiction. Every word is in First Book of Kings, chapter 12. And if you understand what happened in this scene, you'll understand why the consequences were so catastrophic. Picture the scene. Shechem, an ancient city in the hills of Ephraim, about 50 kilometers north of Jerusalem. The air is dry. The sun beats straight down on the stones. First Book of Kings, chapter 12, verse 1, says that all Israel came to Shechem to make Rehoboam king. They didn't go to Jerusalem, they went to Shechem. And that alone is a sign that something isn't right. Shechem was northern territory, home to the tribes that felt marginalized by Solomon's policies. The fact that Rehoboam had to go there, instead of them coming to the capital, already shows the power was off balance. And there in Shechem, a man appears who will change history forever. His name is Jeroboam, son of Nebat. First Book of Kings, chapter 11, verses 26 through 28 explains who he was: an Ephraimite, a servant of Solomon, a valiant and capable man whom Solomon had put in charge of all the forced labor of the house of Joseph. But the prophet Ahijah of Shiloh had found him on the road, had taken off his new cloak, had torn it into 12 pieces, and had told him, "Take for yourself 10 pieces, for thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. Behold, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and I will give you 10 tribes." First Book of Kings, chapter 11, verses 30 through 31. When Solomon found out about this prophecy, he tried to kill Jeroboam. First Book of Kings, chapter 11, verse 40. Jeroboam fled to Egypt and took refuge with Pharaoh Shishak until Solomon died. And now Solomon is dead. Jeroboam has returned from Egypt, and all Israel is gathered in Shechem before Solomon's son. Verses 3 and 4 of chapter 12. Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you." Pay close attention to what they're asking. They're not calling for revolution. They're not threatening. They're not demanding independence. They're saying, "Lighten the burden and we will serve you. Give us a break and we'll be loyal." They were offering loyalty in exchange for compassion. It was the most reasonable offer in the world. And the burden was real. Solomon had imposed forced labor on the entire nation to build the temple, his palace, the walls of Jerusalem, and the storage cities. First Book of Kings, chapter 5, verse 13, speaks of a levy of 30,000 men. Chapter 9, verses 15 through 23, details the massive building projects. And maintaining 1,000 women with their respective entourages, temples, priests, and rituals cost a fortune that came directly from the people's taxes. Rehoboam told them, "Go away for 3 days, then come back to me." Verse 5. He asked for time to think. And what he did during those 3 days is one of the most terrifying lessons on leadership in the entire Bible. First, he consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon. Verses 6 and 7. The men who had seen how an empire is governed, the ones who had been in the throne room for decades, the ones who knew the pressure the people had endured. And what did they tell him? "If you will be a servant to this people today and serve them and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever. Be a servant to the people, answer them with good words, and they will serve you forever." Perfect advice. Wise advice, advice that would have saved the nation. But Rehoboam abandoned the counsel of the elders. Verse 8, he abandoned it. He discarded it as if it were trash, and he went to consult the young men who had grown up with him. His friends, the ones who had grown up in the privilege of the royal palace without having worked a single day in their lives. The ones who had never felt the weight of taxes or the sweat of forced labor. And you know what those young men told him. Verses 10 and 11. "Thus shall you speak to this people. My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." Read that again. My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. It's a phrase that basically says the weakest part of me is stronger than the strongest part of my father. It's pure arrogance distilled into a grotesque metaphor. And the scorpions. In the ancient world, a scorpion wasn't just the animal. It was also the name for a type of whip with metal or bone tips embedded in the straps. A regular whip left marks. A scorpion tore flesh. Rehoboam has just promised to torture his own people worse than his father made them suffer. And here's something few preachers mention. The Hebrew text of this passage has a brutal subtlety. When the young men say, "my little finger," the Hebrew word they use is ambiguous. Some rabbinic commentators, including the Targum, interpret the original phrase as something even more vulgar, an obscene bodily reference designed to humiliate the people. It wasn't just arrogance, it was contempt. It was a young man raised in the palace, looking down at the people who had built that palace with their hands. And there's a principle here that applies to any era, when one generation builds something through sacrifice, and the next generation inherits that something without having paid the price, they almost always take it for granted. Rehoboam never carried stones, never carved wood, never paid the taxes that financed his father's glory. And that's why he didn't have the slightest idea what the people had endured. Think about your own life. Have you ever seen someone inherit a family business and destroy it within a year? A child who receives a company that took 30 years of sacrifice to build and drives it into bankruptcy through arrogance, through refusing to listen, through surrounding themselves with friends who tell them what they want to hear instead of what they need to hear. That's exactly what's happening here. Except it's not a business, it's a nation of millions of people, and the consequences aren't a balance sheet in the red. Their entire generations destroyed. If that just gave you chills, wait. Because what Rehoboam did isn't even the first terrifying thing. It's only the spark that lit the fire, and what comes next is much, much worse. 3 days later, the people returned. Verse 12. Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the 3rd day as the king had directed. And Rehoboam answered them harshly. He abandoned the counsel of the elders, and he spoke to them according to the counsel of the young men, saying, "My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." Verses 13 and 14. And verse 15 adds something chilling. So the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of affairs brought about by the Lord, that he might fulfill his word, which the Lord spoke by Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Did you catch that? God didn't cause Rehoboam's arrogance. Rehoboam was arrogant by his own choice. But God used that arrogance to fulfill what he had already prophesied. One man's stupidity became the instrument of divine judgment, and in that instant, the nation exploded. If you're listening to this and feel something tighten in your chest, it's because what just happened has an echo that resonates to this day. Every time a leader chooses arrogance over compassion, every time someone with power ignores wise counsel and only listens to those who tell them what they want to hear, the result is the same: destruction. And if this touched something in you, hit like on this video, because what's coming is even more powerful. Verse 16, First Book of Kings, chapter 12. And when all Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, the people answered the king, saying, "What portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Look after your own house, David." What portion do we have in David? That phrase split the nation in two. The 10 northern tribes said, "We are no longer part of the house of David. It's over. We're leaving." And they went to their tents. Verse 16. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day, says verse 19. And Rehoboam, in an act of supreme stupidity that proves he still didn't understand what was happening, sent Adoram, the man in charge of tributes and forced labor, to negotiate with the rebel tribes. Verse 18. Remember the scene this video opened with? This is that moment. Rehoboam sent the man who represented exactly what the people hated. The tax collector, the foreman of labor slavery, and the people stoned him. First Book of Kings, chapter 12, verse 18. They killed him in front of everyone. And Rehoboam hurriedly mounted his chariot and fled to Jerusalem. Now you know why he was running. Do you understand the magnitude of what just happened? The nation that God formed over centuries, from the calling of Abraham to the conquest of Canaan, the nation that conquered Canaan under Joshua, the nation that David unified with blood and sweat and faith, the nation that Solomon brought to its highest point of glory, wealth and power, that nation has just split in two, forever. The 10 northern tribes formed their own kingdom under Jeroboam. They kept the name Israel. They had more territory, more population, more agricultural resources. Their capital was eventually established in Samaria. The 2 southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, stayed with Rehoboam. Their kingdom was called Judah. It was much smaller, much poorer in resources, but it had something the north didn't: Jerusalem, the temple, the line of David, the messianic promise. And here's a detail that goes unnoticed, but is fundamental. When Rehoboam arrived in Jerusalem, he assembled all the house of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, 180,000 chosen warriors, to make war against Israel and recover the kingdom. Verse 21. He wanted to reclaim by force what his arrogance had destroyed. But God sent the prophet Shemaiah. Verses 22 through 24. Thus says the Lord, you shall not go up or fight against your brothers, the people of Israel. Every man return to his home, for this thing is from me. This thing is from me. God didn't just allow the division. God executed it. God claimed it as his own, and he forbade Rehoboam from trying to reverse it with violence. That's what makes this moment so terrifying. It wasn't a political accident. It wasn't a miscalculation that could be corrected. It was divine judgment. The most glorious kingdom Israel ever had was split in two by the hand of God, and that wound never healed, never. In all of Israel's subsequent history, the 12 tribes were never again united under a single human king. What David built in a generation of wars, conquests and covenants, what Solomon perfected in 40 years of peace and prosperity, was undone in one afternoon in Shechem. And there's an economic detail that historians point out that makes the catastrophe even more real. When the 10 northern tribes separated, they took most of the nation's agricultural production with them. The fertile plains of Jezreel, the valleys of Ephraim, the grazing lands of Galilee, all of it stayed in the north. Judah was left with the Negev desert and the rocky hills around Jerusalem. In modern terms, it's as if you suddenly lost 80% of your income overnight. The army was divided, trade routes were cut off, international alliances fragmented. Neighboring peoples like Edom and Moab, who had been vassals of Solomon, saw the weakness and began seeking their independence. And eventually, they got it. Second Book of Chronicles, chapter 21, verses 8 through 10 records that Edom finally freed itself from Judah's yoke during the reign of Jehoram, just a few generations later. Solomon's empire was disintegrating piece by piece, and each piece that fell dragged another with it. And the most ironic thing is that Rehoboam had the opportunity to prevent all of this. A single compassionate word, a single gesture of humility. Yes, my father burdened you too much. I'm going to ease that. That was all it took, but his ego wouldn't allow it. Think of it this way. If someone told you today that the United States was going to split in two tomorrow, that 35 states would form one country and the remaining 15 another, and they would never reunite, you'd consider it a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. Well, that's exactly what happened in Israel, only worse, because Israel wasn't just a country, it was the covenant people, the nation chosen by God, and God himself had just split it apart. But what Jeroboam did next with those 10 tribes is, honestly, the most disturbing part of this entire story. And what I'm about to tell you now will make you see Jeroboam in a completely different way than you've ever seen him before. Jeroboam is now king of 10 tribes. He has the people's support. He has the prophetic blessing of Ahijah. He has God's confirmation through Shemaiah. Everything was in his favor to build something extraordinary. And the first thing he did was destroy it all. First Book of Kings, chapter 12, verses 26 and 27. The text says, Jeroboam said in his heart, "Now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David. If this people goes up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn again to their Lord, to Rehoboam king of Judah, and they will kill me." Notice what's going on inside his head. Jeroboam is afraid. He's afraid that if the people keep going up to Jerusalem 3 times a year for the pilgrimage festivals, as the law of Moses commanded in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 16 and 17, they'll emotionally reconnect with Judah. They'll want to return to the house of David, and they'll kill him. It's a pure political calculation, cold, calculated, without a drop of faith. And the solution he invented is one of the most terrifying things ever done in the name of religion. Verse 28. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, "You have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. 2 golden calves. Sound familiar? It should, because those are exactly the same words Aaron used in Exodus chapter 32, verse 4. When he made the golden calf at the foot of Mount Sinai, while Moses was up on the mountain receiving the commandments. These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. The same phrase, word for word. It's no coincidence. It's a deliberate echo. The biblical writer wants you to connect these 2 moments. He wants you to understand that what Jeroboam has just done is repeat the greatest sin in all of Israel's history, the golden calf. But this time on a national scale with permanent infrastructure, because Jeroboam didn't make 1 calf, he made 2, and he placed them in strategic locations. Verse 29, he set one in Bethel, in the south of the kingdom, near the border with Judah, and he set the other in Dan at the far north. This way, no one in the entire northern kingdom had to travel too far to reach a sanctuary. It was a religious system designed with the same logic used today to design franchise chains, maximum coverage, easy access, 0 reason to go to the competition, which in this case was Jerusalem. And verse 30 says something brutal, and this thing became a sin, for the people went as far as Dan to be before one. They went all the way to Dan. The people traveled over 160 kilometers north to worship a golden calf, instead of walking a few kilometers south to worship God at his temple. If you've ever seen someone make an enormous effort to go in the wrong direction, you know exactly how this feels. Sometimes idolatry isn't laziness. Sometimes idolatry requires more effort than true worship. But the human heart prefers to walk 200 kilometers toward a golden calf rather than kneel in the right place. But Jeroboam didn't stop there. Verses 31 through 33 describe something that goes far beyond the calves. Jeroboam built temples on the high places. He appointed priests from among the people who were not Levites, directly violating the law of Numbers chapter 3, verses 10 and 11, which reserved the priesthood exclusively for the sons of Levi. He invented a feast in the 8th month. On the 15th day, an imitation of the Feast of Tabernacles celebrated in the 7th month, so the people would have no reason to go to Jerusalem even for the festivals. Do you understand what he did? He didn't just create idols. He created a complete parallel religion, new gods, new temples, new priests, new festivals, an entire religious system designed to replace the true one, but with enough appearance of legitimacy that people accepted it without too much resistance. And that, to me, is the most terrifying thing of all. Because the people didn't rebel. The people didn't say, wait, this isn't what God commanded. The people went, they worshipped, they participated, they got used to it. And within 2 generations, nobody remembered what true worship looked like. There's something deeply disturbing about how idolatry works on a generational level. The first generation knows they're doing something wrong. Jeroboam knew perfectly well that what he was doing violated the law of Moses. He wasn't ignorant. He had received the prophecy of Ahijah. He knew who the true God was, but he chose convenience over conviction. The second generation grows up with the calves as something normal. Their parents took them to Dan or Bethel since childhood. They never knew the Temple of Jerusalem. They never saw the golden cherubim of the Holy of Holies. For them, worshipping in front of a golden calf was what had always been done. And the third generation doesn't even know there's something different. For them, the golden calves aren't idolatry. They're tradition, their identity, they're our way of worshipping God. That's what institutionalized idolatry does. It doesn't just deceive one person, it deceives entire generations. And the most terrifying part is that each generation is further from the truth than the last, but feels more confident they're in the right. Want to know something that should make you uncomfortable? This same pattern exists today. There are churches where things are taught that directly contradict what the Bible says, but because they've been taught for 2 or 3 generations, nobody questions them. Not because they're true, but because they're familiar. And the familiar always feels like truth, even when it isn't. Jeroboam didn't invent an atheistic religion. He didn't tell the people that God didn't exist. He told them the calves were the way to worship God. He used God's name. He used the story of the Exodus. He used sacred language. But he changed the content, and that is far more dangerous than open atheism, because atheism is easily identified. But a false faith disguised as true faith can deceive entire nations for centuries. If this is stirring something inside you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because what we've just seen isn't just ancient history. It's a pattern that repeats every time someone creates a convenient version of God to serve their own interests. And there's a fourth thing that happened that almost nobody knows about, and it's possibly the most devastating in material terms. Everyone knows about the division of the kingdom. Many know about the golden calves. But what almost nobody remembers is that just 5 years after Solomon's death, a foreign army invaded Jerusalem and plundered the temple of God. 5 years. That's all it took for Solomon's glory to become spoils of war. First Book of Kings, chapter 14, verse 25. In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. Shishak, in Egyptian, Shechem. He wasn't just any pharaoh, he was the founder of the 22nd dynasty of Egypt, a military leader of Libyan origin who had consolidated power through strategic alliances and military campaigns. And here's a detail that connects everything. Remember where Jeroboam had taken refuge when he fled from Solomon. First Book of Kings, chapter 11, verse 40, in Egypt, with Shishak, the same Shishak who now invades. There are scholars like Kenneth Kitchen, an Egyptologist from the University of Liverpool, who believe the alliance between Jeroboam and Shishak wasn't accidental. Jeroboam spent years in Shishak's court, and some historians suggest that Shishak's invasion was part of a broader strategy to weaken both kingdoms, north and south, and restore Egyptian influence in the region Solomon had controlled. But regardless of the political motivations, what Shishak did in Jerusalem was devastating. Verse 26 of 1 Kings 14. He took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He took away everything. He also took away all the shields of gold that Solomon had made, all the treasures of the temple, all the treasures of the palace, all the gold shields. Do you know what that means? The gold shields Solomon had made are described in First Book of Kings, chapter 10, verses 16 and 17. 200 large shields of beaten gold, each using 600 shekels of gold. 300 smaller shields, each using 3 minas of gold. He kept them in the house of the forest of Lebanon, his ceremonial armory. They were the visible symbol of Israel's wealth and power. Shishak took them all, and verse 27 shows the humiliation that followed. And King Rehoboam made in their place shields of bronze and committed them to the hands of the officers of the guard. Bronze shields where there had once been gold shields, bronze instead of gold, the cheap imitation instead of the genuine article. It's an image that sums up everything that happened to Israel after Solomon. Everything was replaced by something inferior, something that resembled the original, but wasn't. And there's a detail here that deserves a moment's pause. The text says, Rehoboam placed the bronze shields in the hands of the officers of the guard, and that every time the king entered the house of the Lord, the guards carried them and afterward returned them to the guard room. First Book of Kings, chapter 14, verses 27 and 28. In other words, they kept doing the same ceremony. They kept marching with shields. They kept following royal protocol, but the shields were bronze, not gold. The form was the same. The substance was different. Do you know how many people live like that? They maintain the ceremony, they maintain the rituals, they go to church, they sing the songs, they say the prayers, but what was once gold is now bronze. What was once genuine is now routine. What was once fire is now ashes dressed up as form. And nobody notices because the ceremony is still the same. Rehoboam marched with bronze shields as if they were gold, and probably after a few years, nobody remembered they were ever gold. That's the fourth terrifying thing that happened after Solomon's death. They didn't just lose the riches, they lost the ability to recognize the difference between the genuine and the imitation. And when you lose that, you've lost everything. And there's more. Second Book of Chronicles, chapter 12, verses 1 through 4, dramatically expands the account. It says, Shishak didn't just attack Jerusalem. According to Chronicles, he came with 1,200 chariots, 60,000 horsemen, and an innumerable army of Libyans, Sukkiim, and Ethiopians. He captured the fortified cities of Judah and came as far as Jerusalem, the fortified cities of Judah. The very cities Solomon had built and fortified with the people's taxes. Second Book of Chronicles, chapter 11, verses 5 through 12, lists the 15 cities Rehoboam had fortified: Bethlehem, Etam, Tekoa, Beth-zur, Soko, Adullam, Gath, Maresha, Ziph, Adoraim, Lachish, Azekah, Zorah, Aijalon, and Hebron. 15 fortresses, and Shishak took them one by one. And there is archaeological evidence of this. In the temple of Amun at Karnak in southern Egypt, there exists a massive stone relief depicting Shoshonk's campaign. It contains a list of more than 150 cities conquered in Canaan. Archaeologists have identified many of them as cities mentioned in the Bible. It's one of the most impressive extra-biblical confirmations of an Old Testament event. If you ever visit Luxor, Egypt, and walk through the Karnak temple, you'll see a huge wall in the Bubastite portal where Shishak is depicted with arm raised, holding a group of kneeling prisoners by the hair. Below are oval cartouches with the names of conquered cities. Egyptologists have been able to read names like Tarnak, Shunem, Beth-shean, Megiddo, Gibeon, Aijalon, cities that appear in the Bible, cities where God's people lived, carved in Egyptian stone as trophies of war. And here's a fascinating detail. That list doesn't just include cities from Judah, the southern kingdom. It also includes cities from the north, from Jeroboam's kingdom, which means Shishak didn't just attack Rehoboam. He also attacked Jeroboam, his former protege. The pharaoh who had sheltered him for years was now plundering his territory. Jeroboam learned the hard way that allies of convenience are never real allies. And at Megiddo, archaeologists found a fragment of a commemorative stele of Shechem. It's one of the most direct pieces of evidence that this military campaign actually happened exactly as the Bible describes. But let's return to Jerusalem, because what happened there carries a crushing symbolic weight. In 2 Chronicles 12, verses 5 through 8, the prophet Shemaiah appears, the same one who had forbidden Rehoboam from waging war against the north. Now he comes with another message. Thus says the Lord, "You abandoned me, so I have abandoned you to the hand of Shishak. You abandoned me, I have abandoned you." And then the princes of Israel and the king humbled themselves and said, "The Lord is righteous." Verse 6. And when God saw that they humbled themselves, the word of the Lord came to Shemaiah, saying, "They have humbled themselves. I will not destroy them. I will grant them some deliverance, and my wrath shall not be poured out on Jerusalem by the hand of Shishak. Nevertheless, they shall be his servants, so that they may know the difference between serving me and serving the kingdoms of the nations." Verses 7 and 8, did you hear that last line? So that they may know the difference between serving me and serving the kingdoms of the nations. God let them experience slavery to a foreign power so they could compare, so they could understand the difference between being a servant of God and being a servant of Egypt. And Shishak took the treasures, all the gold, all the silver, everything Solomon had accumulated during 40 years of glorious reign, gone in a single military campaign. What took decades to build was lost in weeks. Imagine working your whole life building something beautiful, a business, a family, a legacy, and one day, because of the wrong decisions of someone who came after you, all of it vanishes. Not in years, in weeks. That's what happened to Solomon's work, and that's what can happen to any legacy not grounded in obedience. If you're subscribed to this channel, you already know that every video seeks to go deeper than what's taught on the surface. And what comes now is the darkest layer of this entire story. Because everything we've seen so far, the arrogance, the division, the idolatry, the invasion, all of it led to something the Bible describes with words that turn your stomach. First Book of Kings, chapter 14, verses 22 through 24. And Judah did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins that they committed, more than all that their fathers had done. More than everything their fathers had done. That includes those who worshiped the golden calf in the wilderness, those who intermarried with the Canaanites during the time of the judges, those who demanded a king like the other nations. Judah, the southern kingdom, the one with the temple, the one with the line of David, did things worse than all previous generations. And verse 23 specifies, "For they also built for themselves high places and pillars, and Asherim on every high hill, and under every green tree." High places, pillars, Asherah poles, on every hill, under every tree. It wasn't a localized sin. It wasn't a pagan temple in some forgotten corner. It was a total contamination of Judah's spiritual landscape. Every hilltop, every grove, every elevated place became a pagan shrine. And verse 24 is the hardest to read. "And there were also male cult prostitutes in the land. They did according to all the abominations of the nations that the Lord drove out before the people of Israel." The word translated as male cult prostitutes is the Hebrew kadesh. which literally means consecrated ones or holy ones. But it refers to cultic prostitutes, men and women who practice sacred prostitution as part of Canaanite fertility rituals. It was a practice the law of Moses explicitly forbade in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 17. None of the daughters of Israel shall be a cult prostitute, and none of the sons of Israel shall be a cult prostitute. And now that practice was established in Judah, in the kingdom that had the temple of God, in the shadow of the Holy of Holies, where the divine presence dwelled. The people practiced pagan sexual rituals. And the text says they acted according to all the abominations of the nations that the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. That phrase is loaded with devastating irony. God expelled the Canaanites from the land precisely because of these practices. Leviticus chapter 18, verses 24 and 25 says it explicitly. Do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things, for by all these the nations I am driving out before you have become unclean. And the land became unclean, so that I punished its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. The land vomited out the Canaanites. And now the Israelites were doing the exact same things the Canaanites had done. What do you think was going to happen? There's something about the psychology of spiritual decline that this passage illustrates with chilling clarity. Moral degradation never happens all at once. It happens in phases. First, you tolerate what you once rejected. The high places existed in Israel before Solomon, but they were tolerated as a minor problem. Second, you normalize what you once tolerated. Under Rehoboam, the high places were no longer an anomaly. They were part of the landscape. Third, you celebrate what you once normalized. The Asherah images weren't hidden in basements. They were on every hilltop and under every green tree. And fourth, you institutionalize what you once celebrated. Cultic prostitution became part of the official religious system. It's like a staircase descending into darkness. Each step seems small. Each step seems insignificant. But when you look up after 20 steps, the light from above is barely visible, and the speed at which Judah fell is terrifying. Solomon reigned 40 years. First Book of Kings, chapter 11, verse 42. Rehoboam reigned 17 years. First Book of Kings, chapter 14, verse 21. In fewer than 60 combined years, the nation went from building the most glorious temple of the ancient world to practicing cultic prostitution in the shadow of that very temple. Less than 60 years, that's barely 2 generations. 2 generations to go from the highest point of holiness to the lowest point of degradation. And if you think that only happened in biblical times, look around you. How many families have you seen where the grandparents had a deep and authentic faith? The parents maintained it out of habit, and the grandchildren don't even know what they believe. 2 generations, that's all it takes. And this wasn't just in the South. The North was worse. Much worse, because the North had Jeroboam's golden calves as the official state religion. First Book of Kings, chapter 15, verses 25 and 26 speaks of Nadab, Jeroboam's son, who reigned over Israel and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of his father. And in his sin, which he made Israel to sin. That phrase, his sin which he made Israel to sin, becomes a refrain that repeats like a curse throughout the entire Book of Kings. Every northern king without exception is evaluated with those words. He walked in the way of Jeroboam, and in his sin which he made Israel to sin. It's like a judicial sentence that gets copied and pasted for 200 years. 200 years. That's how long the northern kingdom lasted before Assyria destroyed it in 722 BC. Second Book of Kings, chapter 17, verses 5 and 6. The king of Assyria invaded the entire land and went up to Samaria and besieged it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria, and he carried Israel away into exile to Assyria. The 10 tribes were deported, scattered across the Assyrian Empire, and they never returned. Scholars call them the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and they've been lost for more than 2,700 years. 2,700 years. Think about that. 2,700 years, and nobody knows where they are. There are communities in Ethiopia, India, Myanmar, China, Afghanistan that claim to be descendants of those tribes. The Bene Israel of India, the Beta Israel of Ethiopia, the B'nai Menashe of northeastern India. Each has traditions, rituals, and genealogies that suggest Israelite origin, but there's no absolute certainty. The 10 most powerful tribes of Israel dissolved into history like salt in the ocean, and it all started with 2 golden calves and a man who was more afraid of losing power than of losing God. The destruction of the north should have been a warning to the south, and for a time it was. Some kings of Judah, like Hezekiah and Josiah, attempted genuine reforms. Second Book of Kings, chapter 18, verses 3 through 6, describes how Hezekiah removed the high places, smashed the pillars, cut down the Asherah poles, and even destroyed the bronze serpent Moses had made, because the people had been burning incense to it. And 2 Kings, chapter 22, describes how Josiah found the lost book of the law in the temple, read it, and tore his robes in horror when he realized how far they had fallen. But the reforms didn't last. After Josiah, his sons and grandsons returned to idolatry. And in 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, razed Solomon's temple to the ground, and deported the people to Babylon. Second Book of Kings, chapter 25. The temple Solomon built with the finest materials in the world, with the cedars of Lebanon, with the gold of Ophir, with stones cut to perfection, reduced to rubble. The pillars of Jachin and Boaz toppled, the bronze sea broken to pieces, the golden vessels melted down, everything that represented God's presence among his people wiped from the face of the earth. And 2 Chronicles, chapter 36, verses 15 and 16, gives the final reason the Lord, the God of their fathers, sent persistently to them by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words and scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. No remedy. Those 2 words are the most terrifying in the entire Old Testament. God sent prophet after prophet: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Micah, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, one after another for generations, and the people mocked all of them until there was no remedy. For the same reasons that started the day Solomon died: idolatry, arrogance, and the systematic rejection of the voice of God. But there's something in this story that goes beyond the political and religious catastrophe. Something I believe is the most important lesson for anyone listening today. And it's something nobody has probably told you in this way. There's a man sitting alone in his office. It's 11 at night. The glow of his computer screen is the only light in the room. He just sent an email he knows he shouldn't have sent. A decision he made 6 months ago, a small ethical concession in a business deal, has become a chain of compromises he now doesn't know how to break. His wife asked an hour ago if he was okay. He said yes, but he's not okay. He hasn't been okay for months. And the worst part is, he knows exactly when it started. He knows what the first step was. He knows the exact moment he chose convenience over conviction, and now the distance between where he is and where he should be is so great he doesn't know if he can get back. If you saw yourself in that scene even for a second, listen closely, because what I'm about to say has everything to do with what we just learned from Solomon. When you look at everything that happened after Solomon's death, you see a pattern that repeats with terrifying precision. First, a leader makes an arrogant decision. Rehoboam listens to the young men instead of the elders. Second, that decision causes a rupture that can't be repaired. The 10 tribes leave and never return. Third, someone exploits the chaos to create a false substitute for the real thing. Jeroboam creates a parallel religion. Fourth, an external enemy exploits the internal weakness. Shishak plunders what was left. And fifth, the next generation normalizes what the previous generation would have considered unthinkable. Idolatry, cultic prostitution, abominations become the new normal. That pattern didn't die with Israel. That pattern is still alive. You see it in families where an arrogant decision by the father destroys the unity that took years to build. You see it in churches where a leader creates their own version of God to maintain control. You see it in nations where the arrogance of power ignores the people's cry. You see it in marriages where a small concession opens a door that can never be closed again. And you see it in your own life every time you choose comfort over obedience. Every time you consult the young men, the voices that tell you what you want to hear, instead of consulting the elders, the voices that tell you what you need to hear. Every time you build a golden calf to avoid making the journey to Jerusalem, meaning every time you create a spiritual shortcut to avoid the real cost of following God. The difference between Rehoboam and the elders who counseled him can be summed up in a single word: service. The elders told him, "Be a servant to the people." The young men told him, "Be lord over the people." And that single difference between serving and dominating split a nation in two. Jesus said something about this 2,000 years later in Mark chapter 10, verses 42 through 45. "Those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, but it shall not be so among you. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant." Jesus was describing exactly what destroyed Israel, and he was offering the alternative that Rehoboam rejected. And the most terrifying thing of all is how quickly it happened. Solomon died, and within 5 years, everything he had built was destroyed or plundered. Within 1 generation, the practices God had forbidden were normalized. Within 200 years, 10 entire tribes had vanished from history. Think about that. Everything you build in this life, your family, your faith, your legacy, can outlive you or can crumble the day after your death, and the difference isn't in how much you built. Solomon built more than anyone. The difference is in the foundation you built upon. Solomon built a temple for God, but he also built temples for Ashtoreth, for Chemosh, for Milcom. He built on 2 foundations at the same time, and when he died, the false foundation swallowed the true one. And I believe that's the most direct warning this story has for you today. It's not about choosing between God and atheism. Almost nobody listening to this video is going to walk away saying, "I'm going to be an atheist." The real temptation, the one that destroyed Solomon, Rehoboam, Jeroboam, and all of Israel, is far more subtle. It's the temptation to build on 2 foundations, to serve God with one hand while holding an idol with the other, to maintain the religious form while the content rots from within, to march with bronze shields as if they were gold and convince yourself nobody notices the difference. God notices the difference. He always does. First Book of Kings, chapter 9, verse 4. At the very beginning, when everything was promised, God said to Solomon, "If you will walk before me, as David your father walked, with integrity of heart and uprightness." Integrity of heart. That was the condition, not perfection. David wasn't perfect. David made terrible mistakes. But David had integrity of heart. When he sinned, he knelt. When he fell, he came back. When Nathan confronted him, he didn't send Nathan into exile. He said, "I have sinned against the Lord." 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 13. Solomon had wisdom, but he lacked integrity of heart, and wisdom without integrity builds empires that collapse when the builder dies. And this is where the story comes full circle. Remember the image we started with? A man stoned on the ground, a king fleeing in his chariot, an empire crumbling in real time. Now you know how we got there. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't one day. It was 40 years of private decisions by a king who thought he could serve God and idols at the same time. The day Solomon died, the destruction simply became visible, but it was already there, growing, rotting, waiting for the moment to come to light. First Book of Kings, chapter 9, verses 6 through 9. God had told Solomon exactly this at the beginning of his reign, when everything was promise and glory. If you turn aside from following me and do not keep my commandments and my statutes that I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land that I have given them. And this house that I have consecrated for my name I will cast out of my sight, and Israel will become a proverb and a byword among all peoples. A proverb and a byword. That's what was left of the most glorious kingdom Israel ever had. And today, nearly 3,000 years later, the question remains the same. What foundation are you building on? Are you building something that will survive after you, or something that will crumble the day after? What you're about to see on screen takes this conversation to a completely different level. There's something in the story of what happened next that connects directly to a prophecy most people have never heard. If you've made it this far, if you felt something with this story, don't stop now. Click. What comes next will change the way you see the entire Old Testament.